Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be talking all about the Hulu series PEN15 with co-creator, executive producer, and director Sam Zvibleman. And I actually wanted to ask you about the development process and the pitch process for this because, it's reached such a high level of success and people have really responded to it. But you, Maya, and Anna were working on this project for years before we got the opportunity to see it and before it got made. And as you were going through the pitching process, did you find that there were different ways in which the pitch that you were walking in with and the way that you were describing the show to people evolved at all? And if so, how? Or did you find that it really kind of like stuck to the same structure during that time for you?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, and yeah, this was years ago when we first sort of came up with the idea, and it had this very strange, twisty route to finally getting on air. Um, the short answer is that everyone said no except for Hulu. I don't think they really got it in the same way that excited us and that Hulu got. Um, but we what was really helpful is that the Lonely Island guys had this deal at the time where they could spend some money to make sort of a presentation, a visual sort of short film for projects that normally wouldn't ever get made. And we certainly fit that bill. You know, we got a lot of strange looks when we talk about it. But what worked about that presentation is it proved that Anna and Maya could realistically play middle schoolers, and the concept of them with actual middle school age kids worked. Um, and so we had this short film that we took around, and um, again, even with that, everyone didn't totally get it or see the potential of it. I think that it was a little bit more sketchy at that time, a little bit more sort of sketch in concept, and it didn't sort of hit sort of some of the more truthful beats that we eventually found in the making of the show. But yeah, the thing took kind of years to actually get made, and even when it did, I sort of had no clue that people would find this show. Um, and so it still sort of blows my mind when you say you've seen it or anyone says they've seen it and even likes it. It's still pretty spectacular to me.
Yeah, it's like anytime anyone except your immediate family and closest friends say that they've seen
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly.
And with the fact that you shot that proof of concept and you had that opportunity for Maya and Anna to step into these characters, did you find that then when it came to shooting the first couple of episodes of the show, that the voice of it and a lot of the stylistic tendencies were already in place because you'd had so much time to think about it and had had an opportunity to execute a small portion of it? Or were there certain elements of it that you were all still finessing and figuring out what that voice and what that tone was going to be in certain ways?
I think it evolved to being a little bit more, a little less sketch, and it was stylistically we kind of evolved it to just visually from sort of like this kind of handheld thing to a more sort of locked off camera, and we really used the film. Welcome to the Dollhouse. It's a 90s Todd Solondz movie, is sort of the bedrock to what we were aspiring to, and sort of toning down some of the more superficial comedy that we started with to get to more of a real darker place. And even that took a whole season to find even more. Um, so it's constantly evolving, and season one to season two is an evolution too. And I think we're always looking to go deeper and dig and find even more truth, in these dark corners of a middle school heart.
And you mentioned just there that the show became a little bit less sketch-like as you got further in the journey with it. And I've heard Maya and Anna talk about how one of the things that you really brought to the table was for them, giving more of a sense of narrative structure and some of the beats that it needed to hit story-wise when you were writing a lot of the scripts. And so what are some of the things that you feel that you were able to bring to the table in that way? And then beyond that as well, like, how do you feel like even your stylistic tendencies and the way that you arc out episodes has really evolved in the time since you've been working on the show?
Well, that's kind of a big question. I suppose that I had always been a little less interested, and I think Anna and Maya too, with what's a clever line, like and a funny joke on the page. Like, I remember early on we did a table read, and we were like really kicking back against that because we're sort of feeling like, well, this isn't a typical sitcom where you kind of have these like what they call alts, where you're like pitching jokes and doing improv runs. We were really interested in, and something I was always keeping track of was like, what is funny about not making this funny? I found that there's this deeper laugh with not making it a superficial kind of laugh out loud. It's kind of like, to me, it was always at its best when you're playing it really real. And then you think back on it and you're like, I can't believe that that's so tragic to these grown women. And I sort of always kind of was clocking, making sure that it was that type of humor and truth, as opposed to what the funniest line is, even if you're sacrificing some humor in the immediate first viewing. I think maybe you're gaining something more when you think back or upon repeated viewing. And then I think that what stylistically, along those lines, comedy in television and movies, pacing is such an important factor for getting a laugh. And what I was sort of interested in is sort of not slowing that pace down, but not relying on editing for the comedy and like who's got the line and who's got the next funny line and cutting those together. I really believed in the performances of Anna and Maya, and the more you're cutting, I think that the more you're taking away from just observing how wonderful their performances are and the truth in the moment, and letting something breathe and watching them process something as opposed to moving it so fast. So I didn't really shoot a lot of coverage where you have the opportunity to cut and break up those performances. I wanted to observe and show a little restraint and not do too much with, making the filmmaking give you the motion, but making sure that the, you just need Anna and Maya and their faces and what they can do. And I found that is something that makes our show special and unique. And I wanted to make sure of that I was supporting that.
And with the filmmaking style as well, I love the description of almost the fact that the show is often filmed almost as if it's like a memory in of itself as well. And once you hear that, it completely translates into the viewing experience, where there's like a certain softness instead of it being really crisp lines and a lot of the angle choices. And so how does that really feed into a lot of the choices that you make as a director in terms of the lenses that you're using and a lot of the framing within scenes?
Well, a lot of the visual style comes very instinctively to me, and it's not something that I sort of think about too hard or intellectualize. It's just kind of what feels right to me. Sometimes I know it really well before I'm shooting, and sometimes I'm finding it on the spot. But I do appreciate a sort of perspective of poetry and beauty and expressionism, and oftentimes that just means something very simple, and watching it unfold. And there was a lot of talk between me and our director of photography, Andy Rzutsky, who I've worked with for maybe 15 years now, about sort of degrading the image and making sure it doesn't look like TV, and making sure what we can do to push the image to make sure it kind of looked like one of these 90s indie films that didn't have a big budget.
Yeah.
And, which means not anything too extravagant. And we also just didn't have the time or the money to do anything extravagant, so it sort of worked out that way. But a lot of the choices sometimes are just whatever we all decide and think in the moment, and trusting that, and just saying, well, I'm taking a swing here, and it might be wrong, but you know, I'll learn something. It'll be practice.
One of the camera choices that I really love in the show is there's so many moments where the camera pulls us directly into Maya and Anna's characters. And particularly when there's some sort of in joke, that's something, those moments where something is only funny to the two of them and nobody else is in on the joke and nobody else gets what's going on. And you use the camera to really come close up and to really bring us into their world in those moments. Was that because you were saying how everything just has been very natural and very instinctive? Was that something that was just a very instinctive thing early on, or is that something where you consciously think a little bit about when you want to use that particular tool to take us in?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of choice making is probably happening in my subconscious. And there's also simply some philosophies I have, like I don't want to use close-ups too often because they're so powerful. So you don't want to sort of abuse that, so they lose their power, and especially, their physical humor is so great too. So can they express that from a wider shot as well? And can we get that, and we can hold off on some of those close-ups? Or when it's just, I think about Maya in the first season where she's, looking at Brant's neck or something, and that's so small and so specific that sort of really needs their point of view. That's something that can't be understood in maybe a wider shot. But yeah, I think a lot of times it's just, does it feel right to me? And sometimes I'm wrong, or it doesn't work, and or you're. But yeah, I think I was given a long rope to try things, which I very much appreciate, because how else do you grow, and learn?
And especially because since you came into directing, you've directed every episode since then of the series. I imagine that one of the challenges must become, how do I shoot the same locations in different ways? It's the two of them at the locker, or, we've filmed multiple scenes in multiple episodes in Maya's bedroom. What's a new way and a new placement and a new framing that we can think of for this scene? So with that in mind, how do you approach that particular challenge as you get further into the show as a director?
Yeah, that's definitely one of our creative problems. Although with the second season and being able to direct all of these episodes, it actually, I feel like, was a strength. Where, for instance, we have a scene in episode 6 where Maya is practicing her lines. She's just gotten the part in the school play, and we're sort of like, yeah, does she practice these lines in front of a mirror? Well, we started talking, like, well, we've shot so many things in front of a mirror. Is this just going to be another beat where we're in the mirror? Well, how about she's at her desk? Okay. So in that way, we're able to evolve, and similarly, or just not hit the same beat over and over. And yeah, like there's so many scenes at a locker. I remember in the first season, I was just looking to Andy, and I was like, man, I'm so bored of shooting these angles at the locker. Well, how about she opens and we film Maya in her mirror? That's there. Okay, we can start the scene there. It's just something interesting, because we're always craving just something different. Otherwise, you just get bored, and by extension, maybe you trust that the audience kind of gets bored of the same thing. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly how I work. And so it's really nice to kind of have that search for something new is the joy of it. It's not a challenge. It's great. We get to find this and do something new. That's what I love most.
Yeah. And obviously, one of the huge challenges that is constantly coming up in every single episode with throughout the show is, filming with adults and with minors at the same time. And the show never story-wise shies away from the idea of potential romance and crushes and relationships. And there's so many different creative tactics that you all use to work around that, whether it's, the pool party episode where Maya's going around and talking to people and saying things that you don't necessarily want to say in front of a minor, but you don't actually see them on the other side of the camera. We just know that they're there, or shooting certain over the scene pieces with, other actors coming in as doubles. And so how are the different ways that you have to continually evolve the creativity of still being able to address those storylines, but obviously making sure that you're being consistently cognizant of minor performers in the show?
Yeah, well, we're very sensitive to the younger actors. What might seem okay, or you know even totally fine to us as adults, we have to really consider that the language affects uh, kids in a different way, and they have different processing times. A lot of it is very practical. You brought up the pool party, and frankly, we just didn't have, kids can only shoot for a certain number of hours. And a lot of times we're having to exchange, the pool party, it's like we never on screen see too many kids because we're constantly rotating them out. So in that case, it's a challenge for production. In fact, one that I didn't really love in that instance. But you find ways of being creative, and then there's sort of there's even more, when there's something physical happening, whether it's Anna's first kiss or the girls getting felt up in at the school dance. Those are body doubles, and you rely on costuming and hair to sort of try to match those things, and you kind of do the best you can. And uh, you never want to, there's so many people looking out for the kids on our show. Um, and it becomes kind of funny in a certain way when you're kind of clearly seeing that it's not funny, in that it kind of relaxes you. Okay, we're not doing something super creepy, and we're kind of all in on it.
And one of the things I really enjoy about the humor in the show is when you're a kid and when you're a teenager, there's certain things that are so funny to you, and adults are just looking on going, I don't get it. This doesn't make any sense to me. And the show does such a unique job at really capturing that very specific young kid teenage humor, but finding a way to still make it universal. And so I just wanted to ask about the way in which you managed to do that and balance that throughout the show.
Well, I think that's something that really comes from Anna and Maya. They're so good at sort of recalling these sort of memories, and it was always the same thing you're bringing up is funny to us. Like, what's an inside joke? Like the witch episode where they're chanting "Shillelagh Pompano." It makes no sense, and that it's great to them. And you form your own languages, and it sort of fits our theme, which is like that's how you survive. You form this language to really form a connection, and it's funny and it's true and it's so weird, and sort of that kind of thing really is our show. Something so specific and ridiculous, from our point of view, years removed from that age, but also something that everyone seemed to have some version of that at that age.
And then you have the added aspect as well of the time period in which it takes place. And it feels like it's very judicious in terms of a lot of the references that you make, and even the objects or items that you bring into scenes that we're seeing. It's never done just as a superfluous, like, wouldn't it be cool if we saw this? Wouldn't it be really fun to make these 5 cultural references? It's always very specifically thought out, and particularly when it comes to a lot of the production design elements and a lot of the props. How are you all thinking about what is actually going to enhance the telling of this story versus what would be fun for us to reminisce about?
Yeah. When the first season came out, it was sort of like the word nostalgia was attached to it. And I don't know about Hannah and Maya. We never actually talked about it, but I never personally was trying to like conjure nostalgia. I was trying to conjure a truth and what would happen in the story. And then you go into the second season, you're like, well, we know that this nostalgia stuff is so great, but I didn't want to play it like a jukebox, like some greatest hit where you're like, look at the reference here to, it was sort of a detail that was there if you want to see it. And our production design and the whole art team was so great about adding these details everywhere on set, and same with the wardrobe, that are there to be discovered, as opposed to doing some close up on a Tamagotchi watch, which is like, look at us referencing. It's just kind of a little bit more subtle, and just because that's real, like those characters aren't knowing that it's nostalgic and wink wink. They are, it's just part of their lives. And I wanted to treat those sort of production design and costume elements as that's just a part of their life, not something to be gazed at for its own sake.
And when it comes to the communication that we all used to have back at that point, it was a very different world. We didn't know things instantaneously. It was that whole thing of, knowing that you were calling your friend, but knowing that their parents would be the one to pick up the phone,
Mm-hmm.
and having your spiel ready to talk to them. And did you find it was a really easy recalibration to think back to that very simplistic communication style, and just even down to the details of what would a character know and when, because that's a little bit different as well? Or did you have to kind of like think back to a lot of those specific type of details and kind of re-find it?
Well, yeah, that technology element is like really fascinating to me. And it was really so nice to not have to like shoot cell phones and texts. And yeah, how does this technology work? It presents just a great texture and challenge. I remember in the first season, there's an episode where all these kids watched the movie Wild Things on VHS. And as we were shooting, I needed some sort of transition between starting the movie and the movie happening. And I sort of looked over at this VHS, this great prop. And I was like, does that thing open up? Like, can we shoot that? Can we actually shoot the mechanism of tape moving through? Like, no kids today would even, it's like science fiction to them. Like, so yeah, our one of our set dressers just like cracked open the VHS machine, the tape machine, and we just filmed that. And to me, it was like this great journey into how things worked back then. And I was just fascinated by, and a little bit of, I miss some of that today. So it just kind of gave me a kick. But yeah, like getting kicked off AOL because a phone gets broken up. I mean, it's just, and then the kid actors, the young actors had no idea, what was going on. They're like, what, this could happen. And same with AOL, one of the kids who was auditioning, we were like, do you know what AOL is? Do you know what AIM Instant Message? And he had clearly read a Wikipedia explanation of AIM, because he was like, it's a Facebook type messaging system from the 90s. And it felt like it made us feel so ancient, but it was hilarious.
And with a lot of the young cast as well, for many of them, this was one of their first, if not their first professional project that they were coming into. But now they've really had a chance to find their feet and find their style as performers in working with you. And so how has that been an evolution in the way that you, as a producer on the show, as a co-creator and as a director, work with a lot of the younger cast members as they're getting more confidence and finding the ways that they feel most comfortable in finding a lot of the moments in scenes and in their characters?
Well, the young actors on our show is really one of my favorite parts of working on it. I mean, first of all, it was very difficult to cast them. For actors that age, most of their opportunities are, kind of like very typical sitcoms or Disney or Nickelodeon. So there's a certain type of performance that's a little bit more theatrical and a little bit more shiny that we did not want. So it's very hard to find sort of authentic kids who are like, that's a real kid, not like someone putting it on. So, you know, I thought we did a great job with casting and finding these kids. And then the second season, they were simply amazing. And all these kids, I'm talking about like the kids who played Sam and Gabe and Mora and Becca and Jafir. They're very serious actors and they're fearless. And it got to a point where, I could ask them, what would your character do here? And they had a more interesting answer than me. So they sort of took ownership of these characters in a way that was awesome and so fun, and just their energy on set and having young people around. It was so wonderful. The kid who plays Brant too, I thought he was just awesome this season.
So the kids are running the show now, in essence.
Absolutely. The baton has been passed and, they've got it. I get out of their way now.
Well, it really is such a special and unique show that you've managed to create with Maya and Anna and the entire rest of the team. And I can't wait till we get more episodes of it. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you for your time. It's a pleasure.